Hey guys, in this video, we'll quickly go over what happened in the BDO FESTA 2024 stream, and then I'll give my own thoughts on everything that happened. For people who haven't used the code yet, the code is GRATEFULTENYEARS and gives a ton of rewards, so it's definitely worth redeeming it. PA did a really nice job of categorizing each update segment into their own in-game region, giving a clear roadmap of everything that will happen during the ball. Because of that, we'll also use this roadmap for our video. The first region, Balenos, was everything that had to do with new players and life skilling. The second region, Serendia, was focused more on general quality of life improvements across BDO. The third region, Calpheon, was all about player versus player content in BDO. The fourth region, Valencia and Medaya, was all about the hardcore PvP server that was going to be implemented in the future. Orzekea and Atoraxxion was of course about the new dungeon, and Kama and Ulukita talked about a new dream horse. Land of the Morning Light introduced new monster zones and shrine bosses, and Ulukita talked about the future demon realms. They finally ended with Drigan and Mountain of Eternal Winter with a fun event that's coming out in January. Even though the early regional groupings up until Calpheon were clearer and more meaningful, this video will still follow along this order, with the initial rundown of each region and then my thoughts of each region after that. In the final bulk of the video, we'll talk about my thoughts of the entire BDO FESTA and my hopes for the future. They actually announced quite a bit of things this Calpheon ball, also known as BDO FESTA. Before getting into the regions, they started out with the new class Deadeye, which was going to be a class with different gunslinging abilities. The Deadeye class is going to be released on December 24th. They do have some of the skill previews on the main BDO website and did show some of them off on the BDO FESTA stream, and it really does remind me of Corsair with the long swings and skill animations. Even though I'm still going to try out Gunslinger, it doesn't seem to fit my playstyle of the faster, shorter animation classes. That being said, a new class is always fun and interesting to try out. Moving on to the actual content patches, the first region we have is Balenos, where the new player and life skill updates are. The big thing for newer players is that they are buffing how season servers work. They're making a 1000% permanent combat experience buff along with bonus rewards. They're adding in 50 to 100 Advice of Valk stacks from rewards, crafting materials for infinite potions, Marnie stones which give up to 3000 Kaphra stones, along with exchanging 1 Tuvala weapon and 1 accessory to Hex variants after graduation. These Hex Tuvala weapons can be slowly enhanced to deck and then traded in for a Pen Blackstar, while the deck accessory can be traded in for a Tet Kharazad accessory. On top of all of that, they are making Pen Blackstars and Goddard Eyed easier to enhance by making the Agris Forge Pity guaranteed enhanced to be 20 stacks instead of 40. These season updates are slotted to come in December 24th, which is really soon. All these updates are pretty nice, and it gives earlier players a lot more relevant gear paths rather than just free early gear that they eventually have to fully replace. I remember the Pen Tuvala gear seemed insane when seasons first came out, but that was more than 3 years ago in 2021. Giving one accessory and weapon that can be slowly enhanced to one of the endgame items instead of just having to swap them out after seasons is definitely a nice bonus. This is definitely a step in the right direction, and I do think when they add some sort of Kharazad and Sovereign equivalent to Fallen God armors, that they will add additional paths for season armors. As long as they're making it a smoother transition from seasons to regular servers, then it's always going to be a good thing. However, after the new player things, we have the life skill updates for this Balenos section. Life skilling has historically been the primary thing I've done for Silver, so this was definitely an exciting part for me. The first part we got was that Mastery is going to go past 2000 up to 3000 Mastery, with the benefits slowly getting better over time to reduce the fear of missing out being 3000 Mastery. Along with that, we're getting a new Prion life skill accessory that can be enhanced up to deck. Unlike the Kharazad accessories, these are going to be an explicit upgrade from Monos, going up to 250 Mastery per accessory and can be sold on the central market. Much like the other life skill accessories and gear, these will have a fixed enhancement rate and won't use Advice of Valk stacks. On top of the new accessories, we have new Monos fishing chairs, hunting bags, ladles, and flasks for fishing, hunting, cooking, and alchemy. All these life skill updates are coming in around January 8th, so only 2 to 3 weeks off. This portion of the life skill changes is honestly extremely exciting as it gives a lot more progression for life skillers. For almost every life skill, 2000 mastery was extremely achievable with only 10 Manos accessories. I've basically had the same life skilling gear for nearly 4 to 5 years, not needing to upgrade anything as I already was at the 2000 mastery cap. The new crystals and lightstones giving lifeskill mastery really made hitting 2000 mastery extremely easy, and pen Manos accessories were not really needed and only used to flex. With mastery cap increasing to 3000 though, we have a lot more avenues of progression that can meaningfully give us more silver per hour, instead of just making our gear higher for no reason. The new lifeskilling accessories also do help the progression aspect of lifeskilling, though I do wish they had additional benefits other than mastery. The reason for this is that we will probably run into the same issue, where getting to 3000 mastery is going to be very doable without even reaching the max deck Prion accessories, so there will likely be a point in which there won't be a reason to push higher tiers other than to flex gear. Overall though, a great patch for lifeskilling. We need more progression points that allow for an increase in silver per hour, rather than just permanently sitting at cap. Increasing the mastery bracket to 3000 really does help achieve this. Finally, for the last part of the Balenos update, we have the fishing, sailing, and training updates. For fishing, we finally got a reason for fish to have sizes, as the size gets tracked in the fishing guide, and there's also going to be a weekly fishing tournament that is ranked on fishing sizes. We also have auto fishing while sailing boats, along with new managing UI feature for sailors, which gives different buffs depending on the sailor, like cheaper bartering, longer breezy sail, and repairing boats. Finally, for sailing, they are now allowing sea crystals to be combined with Ebenruth's knolls, along with the range of stats from sea crystals being halved for less variance in getting the upper end of stats. For training, we now have an increase in base experience by about 25%, and the stat range when leveling horses is also being halved to make it easier to get higher statted horses. A new mount growth calculator and an easier way to catch horses with wagon is also being added. The mount update should be coming in January 25th, along with a sea crystal change. The fishing guide and sailor things, on the other hand, are coming in February 25th. Now, going back to my thoughts on all of these items, for the fishing update, it is pretty interesting making the sizes of fish have a use, but we will have to see how good the tournament rewards are. I do wish for fishing that there was some way to actually actively fish to get a decent silver reward, and not have it be completely useless. One of my favorite times in BDO was hotspot fishing in the ocean, finding the seagulls that spawned and using a triple float rod on them. The problem is, even back then, the silver per hour was never really that great, and now it's laughably bad. The problem with fishing is that it's always going to be basically an AFK task and didn't have too many opportunities for players to actively play. Hopefully, they add some sort of way to manually fish and get better rewards from doing so. Either way though, this is a nice update in the right direction. On to the sailing part, I will preface this with saying that I was never that into bartering and sailing. The effort to silver per hour of bartering was never that tempting for me, and because of this, the only time I interacted with bartering and sailing was to go for fish or to build a better boat for fun. With that being said, it does seem to be an overall buff, getting more quality of life depending on the sailor you choose, along with some nice buffs like auto fishing while sailing. It does depend how they implement the auto fishing, but it could be possible that AFK fishing will only become viable on a boat if you're able to fish while your sailors also fish. For the Ebenruth's knoll and crystal changes, it's obviously just a straight buff to getting additional base stats for boats, so that's obviously a nice thing for sailors. Moving on to my thoughts on training, training also does get an all-around boost, a little bit boring and still mostly AFK, but still a good boost to silver per hour. Catching horses with a wagon is nice, but seems a little bit too tedious and slow. On the other hand, the range of horse stats being halved is really nice for newer players leveling a horse, or older players who may want to reroll their horses. Having a higher chance to get good rolled horses is always nice, especially when you already have the base horse that you want. Getting skills through using horse reroll coupons is still egregiously tedious, bad, and predatory, but PA has to get some money somehow, so it is what it is. Finally, the training simulator is pretty cool, and it's a nice in-game addition to avoid people having to use third-party tools. It's always been funny to me that the only way to check if your horse is good is to go on a random Discord server and use one of their bot functions, instead of looking at anything in-game. But with that being said, that's basically it for Balenos. Honestly, the highlight for me was definitely the raising of the life skill mastery cap, along with the new accessories and gear. The changes to seasons was also pretty nice, giving people a reasonable progression path after seasons with their Tuvala gear. We'll have to see how PA implements the season rewards and life skilling changes, but overall it seems pretty positive. With all of the Balenos updates out of the way, we have the Serendia changes. These are all heavy quality of life changes that they announced during the 2024 Festa stream. I don't believe that they have any specific dates for when each of the quality of life changes will come in, so no dates for this section. The first quality of life changes is all about tagging and characters. They're allowing you to separate tagged characters to move independently from each other, and lowering the tag cost by 10 times to be a maximum of 45 fuel instead of 450. This is an extremely nice change and a good update to the incredibly antiquated method of tagging characters to copy gear. Because gear is essentially the exact same between characters, I don't see why we don't have family-wide gear at this point, but it's still a nice step in the right direction. On top of the tagging changes, we're also able to change the order of character portraits in the escape menu, which can be helpful to some people. For the second portion of quality of life changes, it's all about items and moving items around. We're now able to get equipped items using the made feature without having to swap characters. On top of that, we're getting the auto move feature added in for storage containers and maids. For items, they're removing the expiry date from a lot of the drop rate scrolls, and they're making it so that they're able to be stacked. Some other side changes were added, like continuous care using consumables with a 1-second delay instead of 5 seconds, and being able to check AP and DP stats in-game. A lot of the item and quality of life changes are extremely nice, as it removes annoying restrictions that shouldn't really be in the game. Adding the auto move feature to the resident storages does help people who cook and do alchemy in their houses, so that is really nice. The scroll changes are just all around positive, as scroll expiring was always pretty annoying. All around pretty good changes that can't really be complained about, and it's nice to have quality of life updates. Finally, we have two quick quality of life updates that have to do with guild missions and workers. Guild missions are now no longer random and can be chosen. We don't have any detail on how they are changing the rewards to balance this, so we'll just have to see how this is implemented in the future. On top of that, we can now see who accepts guild missions, which is a nice change. For the workers, all workers now have delivery skill at level 1, along with players being able to hire workers from any town and promoting workers all at once. These are all just good changes that can be helpful for players with setting up their worker empire. I do hope that they streamline workers somehow, since it still is a pretty annoying time dump for most people. Overall though, a step in the right direction. As a bonus quality of life change, they're also lowering the frame lag from opening the map in-game, which is nice, though a little bit weird that it's announced in a big content update stream. Overall, some pretty nice quality of life update changes for BDO. I don't know if anything is extremely exciting for me personally, since I don't really tag characters that often. Ironically, the opening map is probably the one that will help my daily gameplay the most, as it hopefully also fixes the horse bug when opening the map. Still though, all these changes are a good thing, and hopefully PA continues to work on making the game a lot more approachable for newer players. With Balenos and Serendia out of the way, we're going to Calpheon, where it's all about player versus player content. I will preface this section by saying that PvP has been and is still the primary reason why I play BDO, so I may be a little more critical of some of the things that they said in relation to PvP. Much like the other sections though, we'll first go over what they said in the Festa stream, and then after what my thoughts are. We'll just have a little bit more thoughts in this part of the video. A lot of what they said was extremely theoretical. The first thing that they said was in general, they want to remove resistances in PvP, along with unifying class damage ratios to become more intuitive for newer players. For the Red Battlefield game mode, they want to make a matchmaking system along with improved rewards. In January, they want to implement a replay mode for Arena of Solaire that can be reviewed after and shared to other people. After the AOS season ends, we'll have Guild League, which will now allow up to 3 teams to queue. The second and third team will have the same MMR as the first team, but their wins and losses won't be counted in the Guild MMRs, so it'll be mostly for fun, and for the Guild League participation rewards. Of course, the first team has to be playing for the second and third team to play. Finally, for Node Wars and Siege, they want to unify the caps, making it more intuitive. They also want to remove destroying the siege gates, increasing siege timers, along with expanding the current construction mode Node Wars to be 2 hours long. Trina axes and matchlocks along with flame towers and elephants will be buffed to become stronger, and also reworked to have additional effects. Finally, we have a new guild mount, the Black Dragon, that will be added to the game. So, some pretty interesting things that PA went over in the BDO FESTA. Honestly though, my biggest problem with PA in terms of BDO PvP is that they are extremely good at saying the right things at the right time, but extremely bad at actually implementing interesting PvP content into the game. Even with the things that they did promise in this BDO FESTA stream, there are no explicit dates tied to any of the physical deliverables. If we look at the extremely convenient scheduled dates on BDO Foundry, there are no dates for almost any of the PvP updates. We have Arena of Solaire coming back in January, and then Guild League after that, but those are just rotating game modes that always happen. The changes to Guild League is nice and it helps bigger guilds field more players, but does nothing to update how Guild League actually plays for each person. Now, other than that, we do have the hardcore server coming that could be PvP focused, but that is in the Valencia and Medalla section and not in the Calpheon section. Other than that though, none of the PvP updates mentioned in the Calpheon section has any dates tied to them at all, making it pretty hard to get excited over them. We have no idea when they'll come or if they'll even come. However, beyond PA's failure of putting set dates on these updates, let's judge the updates that they did announce for what they are. Removing resistances is actually really nice as it lowers a lot of the RNG factor in PvP and can make it obvious whether or not your skills are even registering through lag or terrain. The problem with this change is that it comes bundled with so many core mechanics of the actual game that will disparagingly affect all of the classes. For example, some grab classes have grab accuracy while others don't, and that is part of their balancing. On top of that, a lot of classes like Corsair or Shy rely on resistances as part of their skill kit. Shy specifically won't have a use for their resistance buff in PvP anymore and will be extremely weak to grabs moving forward. With that being said though, these are all things that can be fixed with class balancing and changes in the future, so it's not a bad thing that resistances are slated to be removed in the future. The really scary part is that PA just quickly mentioned such a core change in PvP in one sentence, and didn't really mention any of the possible side effects of this and what they're gonna do to prevent these things. That, along with no explicit dates, makes me think that this is just a super long-term vision item that won't really see a solid implementation in quite a bit, or will be implemented extremely roughly and screw over a lot of classes for quite a long time. Hopefully I'm wrong, but the way that they conveyed this change was not very confidence-inspiring. However, after the resistance change, they talked about grouping class ratios into 4 sections. From what I could tell, the groupings are gonna be tank, melee physical damage, range damage, and magic damage. Now, updating the class damage ratios is a nice thing, but much like the previous resistance changes, grouping classes into 4 groups is just going to be a mess of unintended consequences, and I don't really see how it can be implemented without an extreme PvP rework. Now, maybe this is what PA is gunning for, reworking every class again, but they really didn't mention that in the BDO FESTA stream, so we have no idea. Even if we looked at the PvP damage ratios in simple terms, if we grouped the magic classes, Corsair, Wiz Witch and Shy together with the same class ratios, Corsair would become even more unkillable while Shy's would be getting one-shot. Shy's currently have close to a 50% damage ratio while Corsairs have around a 105%. A lot of these ratios are determined by how much forward guard, super armor, and iframes a class has, along with simply how they are played, that grouping every class into 4 groups will definitely require a huge PvP rework. Now, to be clear, this is a very nice update, and much like the resistance changes, does help simplify things to make PvP a lot more playable, intuitive, and easier to update in the future. However, PA not mentioning any of these possible issues or any specific dates makes it feel so raw and non-committed that it doesn't really give any of the fast excitement that the other parts of the BDO FESTA stream gave. It just feels like PA is trying to say the right thing without delivering anything explicit. However, moving on, we have the RBF changes. This is basically the exact same problem as the other two. Very low information along with no explicit dates. PA says that PvP should have increased rewards, but what this means is extremely hard to tell. For those who don't know, they did mention increasing PvP rewards in the past, and our current RBF rewards are these increased rewards. However, the current RBF rewards are still very low and basically meaningless when compared to grinding or doing literally anything else. Now, they did increase the Nodewar and Guild League rewards, so hopefully they do the same thing to RBF. However, we don't really have any information on what these changes are going to be. With no promises of anything and no specific dates, it's difficult to feel anything but disappointment. Now, the matchmaking system for RBF does have a lot of potential and really should be how RBF currently works. If they do it well, along with some type of MMR system, it can make RBF a lot more approachable for newer players. There even is a possibility of adding a capped RBF for new players that just want to try out PvP. My current issue with BDO PvP is that it is just so difficult for newer players to get legitimate PvP content. It's part of what they mentioned in the ball, wanting players to have less burden of being forced to PvE or grind silver multiple hours just to try PvP, yet they don't seem to be implementing anything that combats this. And this is basically the core problem with all of these PvP updates. PA said the correct things in the beginning of the Calpheon PvP section, but none of these changes really reflect what they are saying. But moving on to the AOS/Guild League changes, as I mentioned earlier, these are pretty nice and definitely a positive thing. It does really seem that AOS 3v3s is what they're trying to push BDO PvP to be in the future, so maybe this type of small scale is what's gonna be left. I personally don't really like 3v3s and smaller scale content, but some people definitely do, so it's not a bad thing. Guild League, on the other hand, is a really fun game mode and I am positive about it, so adding in extra 2 and 3 teams is a cool change. These are mostly quality of life changes on existing game modes that are pretty good, so nothing bad to say here. Moving on to Nodewar and Siege, adjusting the caps to be similar to each other is extremely nice and intuitive. Changing the duration of construction node wars back to 2 hours is also nice, as that's what it used to be for base building node wars. Now, making Siege capped at 2 hours no matter what is an interesting one. I do agree that the 4-hour slogs can be extremely boring and tiring, but if it's a legitimate castle defense or attack, limiting it to 2 hours will definitely help the defending team hold out easier. It is weird since some castles really rely on defending the first gate, while others don't as much, so hopefully PA knows this and will balance sieges based on this new change. Again, not a bad change, just one that doesn't have a specific date attached to it or any talk of the unintended consequences. After that, we have the rebalance of Trina axes and match locks along with defensive structures. For the Trina axes, them getting buffed is a pretty nice thing, as with AP just being so much higher and the removal of the Siege Lightstones along with Siege Crystals, axing has become a lot more difficult while becoming a lot less rewarding to do. Matchlocks, on the other hand, are sometimes used to demount things, but not really used as a main damage source. Maybe with this rebalance, they can be used more often in a main ball role rather than just for flex teams. Both these balance ideas are cool, but like everything else, we don't know the specifics at all. Defensive structures, on the other hand, do need a bit of a buff, but the examples they gave of FT's shredding armor and evasion does seem a bit out there. We will have to see how it plays in the actual game, but hopefully it doesn't make playing melees extremely exhausting when having to dive FTs. Overall though, not a bad idea, and it's always needed when the average AP and DP numbers get way too high. Finally, after all the PvP changes, we have the Black Dragon mount. Now, I don't want to sound like a hater, but I do hate this and I am making sound, so not much we can do there. To be fair, this is a cool, unique, and interesting addition to the game, but I don't see how this can enhance player versus player content for anyone. If it is simply just a cosmetic thing that you can show off in towns or fly around open world, then that can be pretty cool and fun. The only thing is that at that point, it's just a reward for PvP and used to roleplay after you're done PvPing. It doesn't actually help enhance how PvP works in BDO. Now, another issue is that they may want this to be used in PvP. During the Festa stream, they showed the dragon being able to spew fire on the ground. If this can be used in PvP, it seems like it's just gonna be a mobile Hwacha that can randomly knock your entire main ball down with no counterplay. Even though that can be interesting, again, I just don't see how this can enhance player versus player content and make it more interactive for all players. The only way I can see this being a long-term piece of content is if all guilds are gonna be eventually able to make a dragon, and they would basically become what elephants are in Nodewars, just in the sky. The problem is, elephants are already pretty annoying to play against, and a ranged flying version in the sky, especially with how bad the Y-axis is in BDO, seems even worse. Again, the Black Dragon does look really cool and interesting. The issue is that I just don't see how this can enhance player versus player content to make it more interactive for BDO players. It's either a roleplay item or a complete nightmare to deal with. It simply vexes me why at this point of the BDO development cycle, they're putting in so much development time on a weird niche item, and I hope that it isn't taking away development time from actual PvP content. In conclusion though, to all the PvP updates, most of these things are relatively positive, and much like every update they talk about PvP, I do agree with at least their base intentions for PvP. I just wish that they would add specific dates to their updates and really talk about how they're going to deal with the unintended consequences. I do understand that maybe they don't want to talk about PvP as much during the Festa stream, but they could at least say that they're going to do a dev talk later on about more of the PvP content. The weird thing that they did in this BDO Festa stream was monologue for about 20 minutes about PvP, then give some pretty obscure update roadmap. Even though I agree with making RBF have better rewards and a matchmaking system, along with the class ratio changes and resistance removal, the way that they announced it just makes me feel so uneasy that I'm unsure of what to even think. But that's basically it for the Calpheon PvP section. I really do hope it's good, but I'm not gonna sit here and say that it was extremely well presented and received when it really wasn't. But that's basically it for the Calpheon section. Next up is the Valencia and Medalla region, which is the next section about the hardcore game mode coming out soon. This is a game mode that is capped at 2 hours per day, similar to Anonymous Arsho, with forced PvP, no name, party, or chat. The goal is to grind points and then extract to claim your points. You do this by PvEing, PvPing, and getting better gear to do more damage. There are also some mini-games like bosses and some survive the circle type events that can spawn randomly. This game mode is scheduled to release in January according to their own schedule. This game mode is interesting, it just brings up so many questions that are completely left unanswered. The biggest weird part is that you're limited to 2 hours a day for seemingly no reason. Do you get to keep your gear after the day ends? Is that why they want to limit it, or why is it there? Am I going to get exploded by people with capped gear if I don't play for 2 hours every day starting on release, or how is it gonna work? For some reason, I thought that this game mode was gonna be basically like Fortnite or any battle royale, where you can drop in as a matchmaking queue and then extract with your points. It could even be like the Division Dark Zones, where you can enter whenever and then exit whenever by yourself, but you lose all the gear when you extract, only getting points or rewards that you can use outside of the Dark Zones. The 2-hour time limit just makes it feel like for some reason PA is trying to limit your playtime in this server, which doesn't really make sense if they're trying to make it a roguelike where you get points based on how well you do for each session. There must be some sort of gear progression that you can take from session to session. With January only being 2 weeks away, it seems odd that there doesn't seem to be any UI or actual gameplay of the extremely new and exciting game mode coming out soon. It feels like they are still in the drawing board stages, yet the release schedule has it releasing in 2 weeks. Overall though, it is an interesting game mode and does seem like there is potential. I just don't really know how to feel when we have so little information about an entirely new game mode being added. I just hope that it's fun and not completely rushed. But that's basically it for the Valencia and Medalla regions. The final regions are going to be very quick as they aren't as segmented as the first couple, but we'll still go over them in the exact same way. The next region is Orzekea, which is the final Atoraxxion dungeon. This will have less early trash mob areas and will be able to be rushed straight to the boss. This should come out around February of 2025. Instead of trash mobs, they will have actual grind zones where players can grind, and the AP for the zones is expected to be around 350 AP. It is definitely interesting for players who appreciate the dungeon and PvP content, though a lot further in the future, so we don't know too much about the specific content. I do appreciate the idea of boss rushing and skipping the initial mob grind, as that was definitely the most boring part about the first 3 dungeons. I honestly haven't really done dungeons recently, since the gear score you need to do dungeons efficiently puts you at grind zones that don't really make the dungeons silver per hour very tempting. They are theoretically pretty fun to do, just not something that I interact with weekly. However, with boss rushing and the removal of trash mobs, it can be a content that may be more enjoyable and worth it to do. Very quickly after that, we have the Kamasylvia and Ulukita region, which is just the new horse Voltarion. This horse is supposed to have some new skills that are unique to it and is going to be released on January 15th. The way to get this horse is through doing specific content such as Black Shrine 8 to 10 rather than through training like the other Dream horses. After that, we're getting the Pity Anvil system being added to all other T9 and T10 horses that goes up to 30 stacks and then guarantees you the horse. This is a kind of interesting idea and does seem to be getting implemented really soon. Voltarion does seem to have some PvP potential as it is able to blink in the sky and crash down for an AoE stun. Definitely more of a weird one as you can just play classes that do that, but may be possible to be used in some Nodewar scenarios. It does seem a bit odd that PA is adding in more T9 horses after we already have T10 ones, but we'll just have to see if there's some use for this horse over the already existing ones. The idea of getting things from specific difficult challenge completions is nice, and hopefully PA uses this for future wars that are meaningful. I don't mind PA rewarding players for trying out new things, as long as it's not used as a crutch for bad content. Moving on to Land of the Morning Light, we have a new grind zone, the Golden Pig Cave, along with the Black Shrine Calamity levels 8 to 10. The new grind zone is supposed to be a solo grind zone that spawns a boss to be killed, and after a bunch of defeats on a server, a chest will explode and drop loot. This does seem a bit similar to Murrowhack, but it will be completely instanced per person. This does seem like a new mechanic that could be fun to play with, especially if you're able to grind a zone as a group and get more rewards depending on how fast your group clears, much like the experience farming parties at Underground Gyfin. For the Calamity levels 8 to 10, it is supposed to be more difficult and use your real gear, and has a fixed amount of attempts per week. On top of that, these drop the new horse masks for Voltarion that we went over before. Even though it doesn't look like there are update dates for these two Land of the Morning Light contents, because Voltarion is supposed to come out January 15th, we can pretty safely assume that the Shrine 8 to 10 will also come out around that time as it drops Voltarion mats. Overall, I'll be honest, I don't really even do my regular black shrines anymore, but this can be pretty interesting for people who like these solo PvE content grinds. I just don't have too much personal input on these two things so far. However, after Land of the Morning Light, we have Ulukita. Ulukita is supposed to be the new region and looking a lot into the future. Because of this, it's really hard to say if any of this will make it to the light of day, but they did share some of their ideas. It's supposed to have 4 different zones with their own castles where characters can capture these zones and basically control the entire area along with their grind zones until someone takes it from them. The character controlling these zones are supposed to be able to freely kill other players within this zone and also collect tax from people grinding in the zone. These do seem like interesting and cool ideas, but if it seems a little far out there, that's because it probably is. It's really impossible to say what will be implemented and how, when all we have shown were some ideas and some pictures of how the area will look. It's definitely a cool idea though, but just so far in the brainstorming stage that there's really no point in predicting how it will play out. Finally, we have the final region, Regan, along with Mountain of Eternal Winter. This region is simply announcing a new winter event along with the costume that will come out around January 8th. With the winter event, we'll finally get the snowboarding content that was teased before the release of Mountain of Eternal Winter. This is pretty cool. I guess we're finally getting Mountain of Eternal Winter Part 2 after almost 3 years of delays, so it can be an interesting event to try out. I do like the winter region, so maybe it will be a banger. I will say though that the outfit definitely looks pretty good and I may pick them up when they come out. Overall though, this is just an event and we may make a video on it when it comes out, so look out for that one. But that's basically it for the BDO FESTA stream. This next part will talk about my hopes for the future of BDO, along with the conclusions for my thoughts on the BDO FESTA stream. Overall, BDO FESTA wasn't too bad. They introduced a lot of interesting content for Lifeskillers and some cool content for newer players. Talking to some of my friends and guildies that play BDO, the way that they sold the PvP content was just really frightening and not very confidence-inspiring in what they planned to do. Overall though, most people did support what they said, but we weren't given any explicit dates, so it's really hard to say. My real feelings about this game after the BDO stream is that I may get some people who have never played BDO to try out, but I could not in good faith try and bait people who have previously played BDO seriously and PvP'd to come back into the game until there are some hard dates and information on any of the PvP content patches. Moving on to my hopes for the future, I wish BDO added something to do with friends who just started playing or don't have the same gear score as you do. It's really tough to sell BDO to people when there's basically nothing you can do together for the first couple of months of them playing. We can't really RBF with new friends as they get completely curb stomped by the gear gap, and most group PvE zones also require higher gear scores. The most we could do is queue AOS when that is up, but that is basically it. I do understand that this is supposed to be more of a sandbox game, but more actual group content that can help out newer players get used to the game would be very much appreciated. Overall though, not a bad stream. I definitely feel like Calpheon Ball is a lot less content packed compared to Heidel Ball and more of a yearly recap. This is supported by the simple fact that they renamed Calpheon Ball to become BDO FESTA to try and dodge the idea of the BDO balls, which are made to tease big content patches. I still am hopeful for the future though, and if PA goes against expectations and actually delivers on the promises they made without any explicit dates, then it can be a very good year for BDO. If they follow expectations and don't deliver on any of the content patches that don't have an explicit date tied to them, then it will only be okay, but pretty boring for PvP. Anyways though, since this video is definitely going to be a long one, I'll end it here. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all next time.